Good morning, everyone. Thanks again for joining us for another Cyber Smart Dealers webinar. For those who haven't tuned in before, my name's Ashley. I'm the Communications Manager here at the AADA. I'm the one that's usually sending you all those sort of annoying emails. Before I jump into introducing our presenter for this morning, I'll just run over a couple of housekeeping things. So the session will be recorded. We'll make it available on the AADA website afterwards for viewing. So that's just so that you can share it with your staff if you want to, or anyone that you think might be get some value out of the webinar. Now, we really encourage participation from you all as we go through the content. So if you have any questions that come up as you go along, feel free to use the chat function or the Q&A function. There's also the raise your hand option as well. And I'll just allow access to your microphone so you can ask that question if you want to. And, you know, Kelly's happy to answer questions throughout, so please don't feel shy in asking anything. Just mentioned her there. We'll jump on to our presenter for today. This is the first time we've had a guest from outside of our sort of primary partners for the Cyber Smart Dealer webinar. I'm very pleased to introduce Kelly Dickson from Macpherson Kelley. Kelly's the Managing Principal Lawyer of Macpherson Kelley's Dandenong office and has been with them for nearly 20 years. Kelly's one of the principal lawyers in intellectual property and trade team, advising businesses on all things business, terms and conditions of trade, contracts, warranties and refunds, product safety and recalls, and ACCC issues, including the Australian consumer law. Kelly's practice also has a real focus on privacy, and Kelly leads the Macpherson Kelley team of privacy and data protection lawyers. Most weeks, Kelly's advising, guiding or assisting a motor dealer with a privacy issue, whether that be privacy policies, consent forms, customer complaints, or data breaches and incidents. Kelly's known for being a practical thinker, providing speedy, straightforward, yet solution-orientated advice to her clients so they can deal with whatever issue is at hand and then get back to business. So if she's not busy enough doing that, she's decided to join us today. Kelly, I'm going to hand it over to you so you can take things from here.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And I was just looking at some of the attendees who were coming into the meeting today. There's a couple of familiar names that I saw popping up on the list. And so to all of you, it's great that you're joining us. And to those of you who I don't know yet, hello. I'm Kelly, and I hope that this session that we run today will be really useful for you. I am hoping that you can all see my screen. I do think that that is the case. And so, as Ashley has said today, I am really looking for some of your involvement today. This session is about you and upskilling you and your teams with some of these cyber issues. I'm really privileged that I get to be the first external sort of presenter that you have outside of your main partners. But what I would like you all to do today is to have your mobile phone handy. So make sure you do have that near you. Normally, when you go to a webinar or a seminar, you get told to put your phone on silent and put your phone away. I would like you to have your phone with you because we will do a couple of interactive things throughout the session today. As we go through this session as well today, Ashley did say that I do encourage questions. So you've got quite a few different ways that you can raise questions for this session today. You can type them into the chat function and you can find that button on the top ribbon bar of your screen. There's also a Q&A function there as well. And for those of you who would like to ask your question, you can put your hand up and Ashley or someone else from the team will take you off mute to allow you to ask that question. So as we go through, you don't need to keep your questions until the end of the session. You can ask them right throughout. And if we end up veering a little bit off topic, that's great. And we can work our way back onto topic as we go through. So for our session today, just as I change the slide here for you, there's a couple of different things that we're going to take a look at. So the first thing is we're going to talk about dealership privacy and data protection obligations. And in particular, we're going to focus on the obligations that you have in your business relating to the storage of data, retention issues, and the way that you go about deleting or destroying the data that you hold in your business. We'll also come back to this as an issue at the end of the session today as well. We'll also spend some time looking at the mandatory data breach notification regime that is in place in Australia. It's relatively new, but for those of you who were at the AADA conference earlier this year, I did a session particularly about the data breach notification regime. So we'll touch on that, go through what the main obligations are, and also take a look at some examples that have been occurring in the motor dealer industry. I'm also going to just spend a little bit of time talking about artificial intelligence and how that actually makes being cyber secure a little bit more tricky for businesses and for employees as well. And we'll also touch on cyber insurance and what your thoughts are, particularly about that, whether it's worth it, and the things that you need to make sure you have in place if cyber insurance is something that you're looking to get. So the first thing that I would like you to do as we get into this, and I'm really happy for you to humour me along with this, I'm going to put up a QR code on the screen for you. So get your mobile telephones, scan that QR code, and what it will do is it will allow you to join a bit of an interactive poll that I'll bring up onto the slides next for you. So I can see that there's a couple of you already joining, so thank you for that. What I would like you to do as we start out today is just to tell me about what are your expectations from this session today. Are there any particular questions that you already have that you would expect me to be touching on today? And I can make sure that I can work those things into our presentation. If they're bigger types of issues, it can be something that we can take offline and look at a little bit later on as well. Now, for some of you, I see that you've found down here the little emojis and the icons. I've turned off the profanity, so there'll be none of that today, but otherwise you can interact with the screen a little bit that way. So as I move to here, I'm only giving you about a minute to type in your expectations and your questions from today's session. All of this is anonymous in terms of your interaction with this system. So your thoughts and questions will come up on the screen, but your name won't be beside it. So if some of you would like to be brave enough to put some of those sorts of things in, I'm very happy to read them. You've got about half a minute left. A fast game's a good game, right? Updates to the current rules, learning new things. Checklists. We are going to talk about some checklists today. Email addresses as being some personal information, getting a bit more knowledge, security issues, things to watch out for. This is wonderful, everybody. Okay, great. There you go. So thank you for participating with that. There's a couple of issues there about some examples. Yes, I do have some of those. We will talk about the penalties that are involved for breaches of the privacy and data protection regime. We'll talk about things that you need to watch out for. And I certainly will be providing you with some real life application and some tips and tricks about how you can make sure you're heading down the right path as far as privacy compliance goes. So thank you for that. Let's get into it, shall we? The first thing that we're going to do is just have a very, very brief overview of Australia's privacy laws. So as I said, we'll talk about this here at the start of the session in terms of what the legal obligations are. And then at the end of today's session, we'll come back to a lot of the really practical things that you can be doing in business and the things that you need to look out for. I'll get rid of this QR code for you so that the slides are a little bit bigger for you as well. But just in relation to our privacy legislation here in Australia and where we are at, here's a bit of an overview for you. So our privacy legislation, the main piece of legislation is the Privacy Act. It has been in place since 1988, and it has particularly since 2018 and through to 2022, had some fairly significant changes that have occurred to it. The Privacy Act and the legislation that we're focusing on today operates at an Australia-wide level. So this is our federal legislation. I will also point out that there is specific privacy legislation in each state and territory of Australia. That is particularly more so for things like health information and health records. So I'm not going to be focusing on those today. We're just going to talk about what the federal legislation is and the main bits of privacy legislation. But do be aware that depending on the state that you're in, there can also be some individual state-based nuances and other regimes as well. So at the federal level, there are 13 Australian privacy principles that apply. And shortly, I'll show you a slide that tells you about those privacy principles. But the 13 privacy principles are the main guidance for businesses for how you go about properly complying with the privacy legislation. Now, as a starting point, when I'm looking at a privacy policy, and here's the first practical tip for you, one of the things that I look at to give me an indication of how compliant a business might be already with privacy, I look for whether the privacy policy talks about the national privacy principles or the Australian privacy principles. So the current wording, the current definition is the Australian privacy principles. So if I read a privacy policy that talks about the NPPs, the national privacy principles, I automatically say, okay, this business is a little bit behind in their privacy protection because their policy hasn't been updated in quite some time. So that's the first tip for you today. When you go back to your businesses, have a look at your privacy policy. Do you actually have a privacy policy as a starting position? And if you do have a privacy policy, does it refer to the NPPs or the APPs? And that'll be your starting position. So that's the APPs. We'll talk about them shortly. But in relation to Australia's privacy legislation, as I said, there's been a lot of changes that have occurred, particularly in recent years. The most recent update was just last year in 2022, where the Privacy Commissioner was given a range of broader powers and penalties for breaches of the Act became a lot more significant than they used to be. So what you can see here is that where there is a breach or an interference with privacy that is engaged in by an individual, so this might be a sole trader who is running a business, not a company, so this is for an individual in business, the penalty has jumped from about $400,000 to $2.5 million per contravention. And for companies, the worst case scenario penalties have jumped from $2.4 million to the greater of $50 million, 3 times the value of the benefit that the business has received from that contravention or the misuse of the personal information. Or if that can't be worked out, 30% of group annual turnover. So they're really, really significant penalties and changes that have come in. I will also just flag for everybody as well that just very recently, through September to November of this year, some more changes have been proposed to the Privacy Act. So the government is currently consulting and going through some submissions about some changes to the Privacy Act. There's been about 116 or so changes that have been proposed. The government has agreed with quite a few of those, and so we will start to see some legislation coming through maybe next year and into the year after as well in relation to putting into legislation these changes that have been proposed. The changes will relate to things like making consent a lot more specific and difficult for businesses, I think, to comply with a little bit. It will also give consumers a lot more rights in relation to the personal information that a business holds about them. And there will also be some other particular steps in relation to information about children or the way that information is being used. We're not going to go through those proposed changes today because our focus is really on the cyber aspects and being cyber aware, but we can certainly provide some more detail about that as it comes to hand. So here I am talking about the Privacy Act and talking about businesses and personal information. So it's really important that we also start out by making sure we're very clear about who the Act applies to and what the Act actually covers as well. And on the slide where you were inputting some of your questions and things that you would like to know about, one of the things that was mentioned there was about email addresses. Are they personal information? So we'll answer that here while we're on this slide. So starting out, who does the Privacy Act apply to? It applies to Australian government agencies, and it also applies to private sector organisations. And so that's where this becomes relevant for all of you, whether you're motor dealers, whether you're vendors into dealerships, any private sector business can need to comply with the Privacy Act. The threshold for having to comply is that the business has a turnover of more than $3 million. So where your business has a turnover more than $3 million, you must comply with the Privacy Act. Where your business has a turnover of less than $3 million, you might choose to comply with the Privacy Act. This issue about voluntarily opting in is also something that's really relevant in a practical sense for businesses, because if you as a dealership have a turnover of more than 3 mil, but you are dealing with other contractors or vendors into your business, and they might be a lot smaller, they might be below $3 million, you've got to comply, but they don't. So what's a really important thing here is that if you're complying with the Privacy Act, you really ought to be making sure that all of your trading partners, whether that's your IT consultants, your marketing consultants and contractors, any of the other people who are dealing with personal information and assisting you in your business, get them to contractually comply with the Privacy Act and to follow the policies and procedures that your business sets, because that can be one of the ways of protecting your business and making sure that, you know, it's not just you doing all of these things for privacy compliance, and then there's a breach or a weakness by them that puts your business at risk. So that's about voluntarily opting in. There are also some types of businesses that are required to comply with the Privacy Act, and they are particularly people like health service providers, hospitals, doctors, schools, because they hold that sort of information. Also businesses that trade in personal information, database sellers, they're buying and selling personal information, so they must comply with the Privacy Act. And as we were talking about, a contractual obligation where you say, yes, okay, we will comply, means that then obviously you need to follow up on that promise to do so. So that's who the Privacy Act applies to. When we're talking about the Privacy Act, it does apply to a couple of different categories of personal information. So the first category is plain old vanilla personal information. And personal information is information or an opinion about an identified individual or about an individual who is reasonably identifiable from that personal information. What's really important here is that it's information or an opinion. So it doesn't even have to be true. If it can just identify someone, that is enough for it to fall within the category of personal information. So personal information is things like somebody's name, their phone number, their address, their email address. Yes, that is personal information. It can also be things like their job title, their employment place. It can be all sorts of things, as long as that information can identify a person or be used to identify them, then it can be personal information. It can go even further. Sometimes tracking of people can be used to identify them. Cookies can sometimes, not all, but sometimes be used to identify people. So think very, very broadly and expansively when you're thinking about what could potentially be personal information. Another thing that I will mention here is that you are seeing me today in my capacity as a lawyer. I'm at work. A lot of you deal with me and have my work phone number, my work email address, and all of those sorts of things. Despite the fact that they are my work details, they are still personal information because they can identify me. So there is no distinction between a personal email address and a work email address. If it can identify someone, it's personal information, and that's all that matters. Another thing that I will mention here as well is that when we're talking about personal information, we are talking about actual real life human beings. So when you have an email address for a company, like an info at whatever, the company is not a person, so its information is not covered by the Privacy Act, but the information about the people in that business or about customers is personal information because it's to do with a real life human being. So I hope that that definition is clear, because it is going to be important for when we're looking at these cybersecurity aspects. That's personal information. Sensitive information is a subset of personal information, and it is information or an opinion about things like people's political opinions and affiliations, their nationality and ethnicity, their trade association membership or union membership, if that's something, religious beliefs and philosophical beliefs. It also covers things like people's sexual orientation and practices, criminal record, and of course, things like medical information, health information, and genetic or biometric information. Now, sensitive information, as its name implies, is treated with a lot more care and has a lot more restrictions on it, because the risk to individuals, if that type of information is misused, is a lot worse. So that is sensitive information. The Privacy Act also deals with credit information, credit history, credit worthiness, credit assessments that are done by businesses and credit bureaus. We're not going to focus on that today, but just do be aware that that is also one of the categories or the buckets of personal information that does apply. So here are the 13 Australian privacy principles. I am not going to slavishly go through these and, one by one have you take a look at them. Today, we're really going to focus on the ones that are relevant to cybersecurity and issues about retention and destruction and deletion of personal information. But that being said, that is the titles of all of the APPs. We can provide you with some more details on these, or you can look them up if this is something that you're needing to take a look at in your business. But we're going to focus down here, particularly in relation to APP 11 today. What I also do just want you to bear in mind as well, though, is even though we're looking only at this particular part, think about privacy, personal information, and the way that you deal with personal information in your business as really part of a life cycle. So the APPs can kind of broadly be split up into APPs that are dealing with the collection of personal information, the way that you use and share and disclose personal information either within your business or to external parties as well, the way that you hold and store and archive and destroy information. That's where our focus will be today. And also be aware that individuals have got some rights in relation to your privacy practices and the way that you're dealing with personal information. Individuals can make complaints. They can ask for access to personal information. They can ask for information to be corrected as well. So I hope that that's helpful for you just in relation to where today's session will sit in the information life cycle, but there's plenty more that needs to be done, not just this. So let's have a look at how do you go about protecting personal information. This is really the part that is very important from a cybersecurity perspective, because the obligation that you have under the Privacy Act and in your business is to take reasonable steps to protect personal information from misuse, interference, and loss, and from unauthorized access, modification, and disclosure. And so these types of security issues can come from a real variety of places. Sometimes a loss of personal information or an unauthorized disclosure of personal information can come from human error. It can come from someone in your business, or maybe even yourself, sending an email to the wrong person, or just really not thinking about what's being done. It can occur from clicking on phishing links, as well as from dedicated, targeted cyber attacks that can occur. So think very broadly as well when you're thinking about the cybersecurity issues that can affect your business. And I know that you've had other sessions that you might have dialed into that have also really been focused on these issues too. From the legal perspective, you need to take reasonable steps to protect information, and you also need to take reasonable steps to destroy or de-identify personal information when you no longer need it for a lawful purpose in your business. Now, we could talk about what's a lawful purpose for ages and ages here, but essentially you need to be on top of the data that you have in your business, making sure that, yes, you're using the information with your current customers and your current trading partners, and, selling cars, servicing cars, doing all of the things that you do in your business. But when that information is no longer needed, you ought not continue to hold that information. And what's really important too, from a cybersecurity perspective, if there is a hack or some sort of other loss of personal information, if you don't have the personal information to begin with, it can't get hacked and it can't get lost and compromised. So this is really about, part of cybersecurity involves you having a really critical look at the information that you're holding. Do you need it anymore? Should you still hold it? Where are you storing it? How are you destroying it? And making some assessments and taking some action about that. So I've got a couple of brief examples for you here. You can see that in the box down the bottom. The types of things that you need to be thinking about when you're thinking about security under the Privacy Act is things like your physical premises security. Here I am at work with my swipe cards to get into various places of the premises. So do you have parts of your premises that are locked down only to particular staff, or is there a bit of a free-for-all around your premises? Think about the security measures and the protections that you have in place for paper-based records. There's a lot of paper that lots of businesses still have, even despite the fact that we now do so much electronically. So think about your paper-based records. Are they in locked filing cabinets or lockable filing cabinets? If you're taking down things like people's credit card details, are you writing them on scraps of paper that are just being chucked in the bin? Or are you actually using portals that can protect that information? Or are you locking that information away? Think about the electronic records that you have. It's not just the emails that you have, but also all of your databases and your CRM systems and all of that information that you've got. You also need to consider your IT systems and your security levels. This is for everything from the passwords and the pins that we have on our laptops and our phones, through to firewalls, the types of encryption that you might have on your systems or on some of the records that you have as well. You've got to think about things like your workplace policies and procedures. Do you have policies in place in your business, particularly for salespeople who might be out and about doing all sorts of things, about what records might be left in cars, or if people are working remotely, whether their screen can be seen by other people who might be in the cafe, and all of those sorts of issues. As we were mentioning before as well, having contractual arrangements in place with your subcontractors or with your trading partners is also a really key measure. What I would like to see here is that in those contracts with your trading partners, you have got warranties from them that they do and will comply with the Privacy Act. I want to see some promises that they will comply with your policies and procedures and the things that you ask them to do. And I also would like to see indemnities, so that when things go wrong, you've got someone that you can turn around and point to say, this wouldn't have happened if you hadn't done this, and so you need to compensate us for the issue that has gone on. You also need to think about things like the way you are doing your archiving and your shredding and your waste disposal. There are no hard and fast rules currently for businesses about what you have to do. The obligation, as you can see, is to take reasonable steps. And so what is reasonable depends on an assessment of how big is your business, what types of personal information and sensitive information and credit information are you holding in your business? What is the best practice that is expected in your industry? So I can't here today say to you, you must use offsite storage or you must hold records for this long and what have you. This is not a one size fits all approach, but do consider things like, okay, we're a pretty big dealership. We've got resources. We've got an awful lot of information about people. So we need to make sure we're protecting that information in a proper way. We mentioned before about the types of personal information that you have. In a dealership, you have a bunch of personal information about people. Aside from names, addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, you do have details like bank account details. You have credit card details. You have got copies of driver's licenses. And what does a driver's license have on it? Full name, address, date of birth, signature, photograph, and all of that type of information is very, very useful in the wrong hands for things like fraudulent transactions and identity theft. So there is a lot of information that is held within motor dealer related businesses that can have some really big consequences for individuals if that information is misused. So do have a think about all of those types of things that you have in your business and what you can be doing with that information to make sure you're protecting it. Think about what is best practice in your industry. And if there was to be an issue that occurred, one of the questions that the regulators will ask you is, what didn't you do that you could have done? And so I often find that to be a really useful yardstick for measuring, okay, what is it that we should be doing in business to help not cut corners on some of those types of issues? So that's just a very brief overview for you of what the legal obligation is in relation to cybersecurity and the protection of the personal information that you hold. As I said, I intend to come back to a few other really practical things for you at the end of the session today. But what I would like to do now is move us to take a quick look at the mandatory reporting regime for eligible data breaches. So as I move to the next slide, grab your mobile telephone again, because I would like to ask you a question. Here's the QR code for you. And I'd just like to see what your thoughts are in relation to this question. You're going to get 1 minute as well. As I'm wanting to go through here. So get yourselves ready. We're going to talk about what is an eligible data breach. Now, when we are talking about eligible data breaches, this is where there is unauthorized access to or disclosure of or loss of personal information that is held by an entity, and that a reasonable person would consider that there is a likelihood of serious harm to the affected individuals. So what this means is not every single data breach that occurs in business and could occur in your particular business is reportable. Not every data breach is reportable, but those that are the ones where there is a likelihood of serious harm. Okay, so I hope that that can be something that just makes this a little bit easier for you in relation to not panicking too much when a data breach does occur. And there are certainly lots of data breaches. You see them in the news. We deal with them for our clients and for businesses. In fact, this week, and what are we? We're only Wednesday. I'm dealing with a third data breach that has occurred to various clients. So data breaches do occur. They are serious and you certainly need to give them good attention, but don't panic when they occur. When you suspect or find out that a data breach may have occurred in your business, there is an assessment that you need to do. And that assessment is about this likelihood of serious harm. So you've got to think about things like what kind of information has been compromised? How sensitive is that information? You've got to think about things like, is it just someone's name? You know, is it a list of names and contact details that has been compromised? Or has there been, for example, a hack where the hacker has got into all of your scanned copies of people's driver's licenses? You've got to think about who has obtained the personal information. Is it that someone in your business has made a mistake and has sent one email to a wrong recipient, worked it out and gone, oh, shouldn't have done that. Sorry, that wasn't for you. Can you please delete it? And the recipient says, yeah, sure, no worries. Versus, is it an actual bad actor who is sitting in your systems and preying on that information that is now compromised? Have a think about things like the type and extent of the security measures that you have in place. Is the data encrypted, or is it that a hacker has encrypted it and they're asking you for a ransom to be able to unencrypt all or some of that information? Have you got passwords and other levels? Are some of your IT systems locked down so that when a data breach does occur, it's quarantined or isolated only to a particular part of your business? Have a think also about the nature of the harm that could be suffered by the affected individuals. Is it just that they might get some annoying emails because they've been put on a list somewhere? Or is it that they might have their identities stolen and a whole heap of fraudulent transactions done? And also have a think about the number of affected individuals who are involved by this as well. So all of those types of things will factor into whether there is a likelihood of serious harm when there is a data breach. So here you go. I hope you're all in. What do you think is the main source of reported data breaches in Australia at the moment? Do you think that it is system faults and errors? Do you think that it is human error, mistakes being made by staff? Or do you think that it is malicious and criminal attacks? So in order to put this question to you for a little bit of involvement, I've been looking at the reported data breaches in the last year or so. So I'm really keen to know, what do you think is the current trend? System fault, human error, malicious or criminal attack? 15 seconds left, everybody. So if we've got a couple of people who are in here, a couple of people are doing it. Counting down. Thank you to those who scanned the QR code and participated in that. I'll show you the correct answer. At the moment, malicious and criminal attack is the main source of reported data breaches. What we are seeing and the trends that the ACCC and the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner and our business, what we're seeing is a really big increase at the moment in terms of cyber attacks, hacks, bad actors who are intentionally doing these sorts of things. So at the moment, that is the main source of reported data breaches that are flowing through. I have another question for you as well. So I'll keep that there for you. You still have 1 minute as well. Do you know what percentage of reported data breaches malicious and criminal attacks account for? Do you think it's about 60% of the reported data breaches, 70% of reported data breaches, or 80%? So these are the ones where there has been an assessment to say that there is a likelihood of serious harm. The business thinks that there is some risk, so they have escalated it to reporting. And malicious and criminal attacks are what percentage of the reported data breaches at the moment? There's a couple more of you who could still put some answers in. 10 seconds to go. Some people are saying 80%, most people saying 80%. All right, here we go. Oh, there was someone who got in at 70% just at the last second there. And those who selected 70% are correct. Malicious and criminal attacks are about 70% of the reported data breaches going to the Commissioner at the moment. So that's pretty incredible, isn't it? And it just shows that cyber issues are a really, really critical thing for businesses and can cause an awful lot of disruption to a business if it was to occur. I'll get rid of this QR code for you now, and we'll talk about this assessment. So in Australia, where you suspect that there has been a data breach that might need to be reported, you need to do an assessment, and you have got to do it reasonably and expeditiously, but you have about 30 days to do that assessment. You might be familiar that in other countries, particularly under the European privacy regime, that assessment and reporting time period is only 72 hours. So Australia is a little bit more relaxed in relation to that, to give you the ability to make some inquiries and start your investigations. If you do decide that there is a likelihood of serious harm, you need to notify a couple of different people. Firstly, you need to notify the Australian Privacy Commissioner, and you've got to give them some prescribed information. It's done online, and that is the notification that goes to the Privacy Commissioner. And you also need to notify the affected individuals. So this is why doing your forensic investigation and working out what is the extent of your data breach is really important. Because if you can contact your affected individuals and do that one-on-one directly, then that can sometimes have some better reputational consequences for your business. But if you don't know who your affected customers are, you might need to do things like putting a statement on your website, or thinking back to things like the Optus and the Medibank and the Latitude data breaches. It's going to get into the news as well. So you need to be ready with your narrative and what it is that you're going to be doing with and for your customers to try to mediate the issues or the risks that are occurring to them. If you don't report a data breach, or if you don't report it in time, then that's deemed to be an interference with the privacy of the individuals involved, and that's where those really high penalties now can also kick in. Now, there are some exceptions to the obligation to report, and you can see those on the slide there. The one that I would really like to focus on for you is the first one. For a lot of motor dealers and other businesses that are involved in the industry, there is a corporate group. There are lots of different companies that are within that one dealership group, or there might be different companies that are running different dealerships around Australia. So where you have a data breach that occurs to the group and that information is shared amongst the members of the corporate group, you can select one company to do the investigation and to do the notifications and to act as that front for the dealings with customers. As well, if you can put in place some early remedial action that avoids the issue and the risk of harm occurring in the first place, then that can also reduce the requirement and maybe even remove the requirement to do a notification to the Privacy Commissioner and affected individuals. So I wanted to tell you about a couple of examples, and part of this is to let you know that data breaches are happening in the motor dealer industry. All of the issues that I've just mentioned on this slide here, I've dealt with in the last couple of years for motor dealers, and a lot of those examples and case studies have been to do with a little bit of a cybersecurity mistake or attack. So they can come from both places. In one particular example, there was a third-party marketing contractor who had been engaged by a dealership to run their sales campaigns for the dealership. And what happened in that particular case was the third-party marketing contractor had a data breach that occurred to their systems, and the hackers got into the third-party contractor's system, which included details of all of the dealers' customers. So that's how the dealer was involved in that particular issue. There was another case study that was quite a large issue that had occurred, where a dealership client of ours was using a third-party vendor software platform, and that platform was compromised. So it had nothing to do with the dealership. They were using some software that they'd used for a very long time, but there was a big issue with the security of that particular software program. And a hacker had got into that system and had sat on that data for a very long time and was just skimming bits of detail off the top and using it for identity theft and for fraudulent transactions. I just very recently, last week, in fact, dealt with an issue for a motor dealer client where they had a third-party marketing company that was running a campaign for them. And there was a mistake made at that third-party marketer where they sent the wrong customers' details to the wrong dealership. So there was also some advice given on that just last week, actually. So the purpose of this, I guess, is just to tell you that these things are happening in your industry. Some of them will have happened to dealers who are on this call here today. Some of you will be a little bit twitchy from having to go through this process, and others of you, it could happen to you in the future. So that's why dealing with these issues of cybersecurity is so important. I actually was involved many, many years ago in a data breach that had happened at a dealership where I was looking to purchase a car. I don't have time today to tell you about it, but for those of you who are interested to know, I'll tell you about it at another time. But the result of that was that I didn't buy my car from that dealership because I was worried about the security of my personal information there. So the dealership lost a sale because of just a few little stupid things that were done in the dealership that compromised personal information. So I'm conscious of time for everybody. What I would like to do now is just move to make some very quick comments about artificial intelligence. And we've just come off the back of Scam Week, which is a national awareness week that is run by the regulators. Some of you might have seen some of the posts that I had done about Scam Week. But what I just wanted to say here is that I think if you look down here just at these trans-linked SMS messages, I think a lot of people are getting a lot better now at recognising that these are scammy text messages. But malicious actors are far more frequently now using AI to help with cyber attacks. And the way that they're doing that is often by getting ChatGPT or other systems to write the text of the scammy email or the scammy text message, or for researching the intended recipient of that attack. So what it does is it makes it a bit more believable, and your staff are more susceptible to fall victim to these things because it does look more believable. So the email that you can see on the right-hand side there of the screen is an actual email that we received at Macpherson Kelley. It was drafted by AI, but it reads like it could be a real thing. And so this is a way of even trying to suck us as lawyers in to providing information and details and clicking on links that we really shouldn't. So that was just the comment that I really wanted to make for you about AI. Just remember that scams are becoming a lot more sophisticated, and particularly for your staff in dealerships, they will fall victim to this. And so you need to make sure you're training them. We'll talk about that in a moment. I also wanted to talk about cyber insurance. And so I just want to put the QR code back up as well. Scan in, please, for those of you who are playing along at home or in the office. The first question that I just wanted to ask you is, who's got it? Cyber insurance. Do you have it? Do you not have it? Are you thinking about it? It's always a really, really vexed and controversial question about whether you ought to have cyber insurance, whether you can get it because of the current state of your policies and procedures and the protections that you have in place in your business. What are we up to? We're up to about 22 odd people have responded so far. So what we can see here is that, yeah, there's actually quite a few of you who do have cyber insurance in place, some of you who don't have it, and yeah, about the same number of you who are considering it. What I want to do for you now, as the timer just ticks down, is just give you a couple of pros and cons and a couple of practical tips to think about when you're assessing cybersecurity and cyber insurance in particular for your business. I'll get rid of this QR code for you again. So, as I said, it's pretty controversial, and people have got some very definite views on cyber insurance versus not. A lot of the main ones that we see are that on the pro side of things, cyber insurance can actually protect your business from the costs of going through a data breach assessment, your lawyer's costs, your forensic IT, your standard IT costs, claims that could potentially be made by affected individuals, as well as some of your costs of getting your business systems back up online and back running. So cyber insurance can be really good from that cost protection perspective. It also can provide you with some of that legal coverage as well for your legal costs, or if you get sued, for your defense costs that come through that. And some of the insurance also can cover your reputational recovery. So the steps that you take once the data breach has occurred and the immediate crisis is over, through to your rebuild and your recovery in the months coming after that. But some of the cons are the cost of cyber insurance. You will find that the premiums and the excesses can be really, really hefty. And some businesses just say, for the size of our business or for the type of information we have, that's not a cost that we're prepared to spend. You've also got to be really careful with the coverage of your cyber insurance. It can sometimes be the case with the fine print and the exclusions and limitations that what you think you're covered for, you're not, or that the extent of coverage may not be what you end up ultimately needing. So even with cyber insurance, you may still find that there might be a shortfall gap that is a cost that is for the business, not covered by insurance. Sometimes as well, some businesses can think that they've got a bit of a false sense of security. I've got cyber insurance, so don't worry about it. You know, if we have a breach, it's going to be fine. But it certainly is the case that in order to get your cyber insurance and also to then make sure you don't void any of your coverage, there are requirements as to what policies, procedures, and protocols you have in place and that you maintain in your business. You can't get cyber insurance and then just say, that's it, I can forget everything else. You do have to have done certain things and be implementing them in your business to make sure your coverage will ultimately be good and hold up when you need it to. So, as we get to the end of this session today, we've just got a couple more minutes together. I wanted to finish with some information about where to next and some really practical things for you to be going back to business and looking at within your business to make sure you're doing the right thing. So there are a whole bunch of privacy and data protection requirements that you should be looking at. While today we have only focused on that APP 11 and your data storage and data security requirements, please do know that there is a lot more that you need to do. If you haven't already done so, you should be doing an audit of your business and the information that you have. You should be mapping what information you're collecting about people, where it is stored within your systems, who has access to it, who you're sharing it with, and making sure you've got that really good picture of where this data sits and lives within your business. You should also be doing an audit of the types of policies that you have in place in your workplace for your staff. And you should also be looking at your IT network. Get some penetration testing done to see where the vulnerabilities are in your systems, because where there is a vulnerability, that is where it will get exploited. So do like a SWOT analysis of all of those sorts of things. You need to have a privacy policy. And I understand, I get that for motor dealer businesses, you might have your own privacy policy. You'll have the privacy policy of the manufacturers that you deal with. There will be privacy policies for your F&I relationships that you have, and a whole host of other things. But you need to make sure you've got a privacy policy, and it needs to be up to date and compliant. You also need to give notice to your customers and to other people that you're collecting personal information from about what you're collecting, why you're collecting it, and who you're going to share that information with. So think about all of these types of issues that are on this slide. Think about your sale contracts, your F&I contracts, your merchandise store, if you operate one of those, your service bookings, all of these sorts of things. People need to know what you're doing with their personal information. This also extends to your trading partners and also potential recruits into your business as well. Some of the other things that you need to look at, as we said, are your policies and procedures. There are some very specific policies relating to data protection that you need to have in place in your business. Access, correction, complaints handling, your data storage practices, and your data retention periods, and the way you will purge information, archive it, destroy it. You also need to have a data breach response plan in place. This should include your lawyers, your IT consultants, your cyber experts, communications experts, and your insurers as well, because there is nothing worse than trying to deal with a crisis when you are in the middle of it. So if you have got a playbook in place first, it means that when you're in a crisis, you can just implement the plan, and it takes a whole heap of the unnecessary stress off. You will be stressed when there is a data breach that occurs, but having a playbook to help you is one of the most important things as far as cybersecurity goes. You also need to have a corporate culture of vigilance. Consider having cybersecurity and data protection as a standing board agenda item, so that you're constantly looking at this when the board and the senior management meet. And staff training is a really important thing too. It's all well and good for dealer principals or for owners of dealerships to know about privacy and data protection practices, but it's your staff who are on the front line, and they're the ones who are sending the emails, talking to customers, completing the contracts. And so you need to make sure that they're properly trained as well. Consider your insurance position as well, and whether or not that might include some specific cyber insurance. So as I finish up, just a couple of other really practical tips for you as well. You need a fulsome privacy compliance program, and it's not a prepare it once and set and forget. It needs to be a living part of your business. You need to engage really early with experts as well, particularly when you have a cybersecurity incident that occurs. And part of that will include making sure you're giving proper consideration and budget to your IT team or your IT department and your IT systems. A lot of the time, data breaches and security issues have occurred because IT isn't something that has been thought about as fully as it should have been. You've also got to regularly train your staff, as we were mentioning. Do some fake phishing attempts. We even do that here to see who of our staff and who of our lawyers is falling victim to little suspicious links and those sorts of things. Another thing that you can do that is very helpful for your customers is let your customers know how you are going to deal with them. And some of you might be familiar with this from your bank. When I get a message from my bank, that it always says, if someone calls you purporting to be from the bank, hang up. We will never ask you for these things in this particular way. So you can be proactive and tell your staff, we will never ask you for bank details by email. We will always call you. And that can be a good way of also protecting your customers, but protecting your business too. Teach your staff about how to verify things like payment details. You would be surprised at how many times we deal with an email from a business that has gone to a customer, but there's been a bad actor sitting in the middle there. They've grabbed the invoice, changed the payment details, and sent it to the customer. So the customer says, I've paid, but the money has gone to an entirely different bank account. So tell your staff, call up to verify payments. Tell your customers to call up and verify as well. And look, a lot of this to do with privacy and data protection and cybersecurity is about common sense. If you think that something is unexpected or not quite right, trust your gut on those sorts of things, and just use common sense to protect information. Even think about the way that you would expect your personal information to be treated and implement those processes into the business as well. And don't succumb to pressure tactics. While issues of privacy and data protection and cybersecurity are very time sensitive, you don't need to move so recklessly because you're so worried about the time pressure. You do have time to take a step back, get some advice, get a team around you who can help you, and try not to panic about these sorts of things. Sometimes easier said than done, right? So I'm going to bring back up the QR code for the last time for you all. And I just want us to finish with what's next for you. What one thing are you going to go back to your dealership or to your business and progress? What one thing are you going to check? I'm a really big fan of focus. And I think that, sometimes when you're trying to do too many things, you end up doing none of them, or you do a lot of them badly. So just one. What is one thing that you're going to focus on when you get back to your business, when we shut this webinar down? What is it that you're going to check? Just the one thing. And then from that, you can move on to another thing and another thing. But this is great. These are excellent responses that are coming in from all of you. So thank you so much for that. Some of you are going to be checking your physical record storage. Some of you are going to be checking what you're doing with people's credit cards and where you're storing that information. Some of you are going to check your insurance. So all of that is really wonderful. So that's it from me. I would just like to say thank you so much for participating in this with me, and for going through this. I hope that this has been quite helpful for you. The last slide here has got obviously my details on it, so we would really welcome the opportunity to assist any of you with any of the data breach issues or the privacy and data protection compliance requirements that you have. I've also included on this slide Stephanie Orlando, who is one of my colleagues. Steph couldn't be here with us today, but she's one of our litigation principal lawyers. I think that Stephanie is also very well known to many of you already. Stephanie heads up our motor dealer industry focus group. So Stephanie would love to help you with things like customer trading issues, refund requests, any of those types of issues that are occurring in your business. So her details are there as well, and she's a whiz. So yeah, really happy for you to get in touch with her or with me if there's anything that we can help you with. And on that note, I'll hand back to you, Ash.
Yeah, Kelly, thank you so much for that. Some really valuable insights. Before I let you escape too quickly, though, I just wanted to double check. There's sort of 6 question marks showing down the bottom of your AHA slides there. I don't have access to that, and I'm also not familiar with AHA slides. So I just want to double check whether there's anything we need to cover for everyone.
We can certainly go through those and provide some information. We've got a couple of questions here about auto industry cases. We have got so many of them. There are data breach issues that have been occurring in all sorts of ways. If people would like more detail about some of those, including the one that happened to me, we can provide some detail of that. One of the questions here as well is about a requirement for proof of destruction. There is nothing in the legislation that says you must have proof of what you've done, but it is a really good record to keep for the what if. So remember earlier when we were talking about if there's an issue, what could you have done, what should you have done that you didn't. Having records is something that you can do to make sure that you can back yourself, and it might be about reducing some of your liability or fending off a claim entirely to begin with. So I really would encourage you, as far as retention and records and things like that, do keep records. Lawyers keep records of everything, because it's much easier down the track, if something goes wrong, to say, oh yeah, I did this and here's my record that shows it, instead of trying to say, oh, what did we do back then? I can't really remember. You look a lot more credible when you've got some supporting documentation with you. So records is a really good thing to keep. Some ideas to secure customer information. Thanks, Marie, for this question. There's a whole heap of things that you can do, and I hope that we've touched on a few of these as far as your IT security measures and those sorts of things. But with customer information, do think about things like, who has access to your records? Are there some parts of your system that only the people who need to know have got access to those systems? Make sure, and you'd be surprised at how many people don't, but make sure that your staff have got a PIN on their phone. It's an absolute pain in the butt to have to put a PIN or a password in all the time, but it's a way of protecting personal information. Think about multi-factor authentication as well. Have some policies in place about not leaving customer records in employee cars when you go to the shops. We've had examples of that where, cars have been burgled while people are in at the shops and customer information has been nicked. So there's a lot of types of things like that, but it's ultimately up to the business to think about, what have you got, what's the risk that you're prepared to take, and the way that you can do that. One of the questions is also about, will we send slides? I'm very happy to. So we'll make those arrangements for these to be sent out afterwards as well. A cyber gatekeeper. Oh, I'll answer this one first about the date of birth. Date of birth, yes, is a piece of personal information, particularly when it can be used to identify people. And it is a really good idea in your business, as far as a cyber gatekeeper. Have a person or a team of people who are focused on privacy and data protection and cyber issues as one of their position descriptions, one of the jobs that they need to do. And they can report up to management and they can keep track of these sorts of things as well. So it is a good idea to have a privacy officer who can be the contact point and the focus for these sorts of things. That might be some of those questions. I'm conscious that a lot of people need to get back to business, but I'm really grateful that you've spent this time here with us today, and I hope that it was helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Thanks for covering those questions at the end there. As the questions were about the slides, we'll send a copy of the slides out along with a copy of the recording to everyone who attended and everyone who registered, just so you have that on hand in case you want to refer back to it, or again, in case you want to share it amongst your staff, because, this forms part of the staff training that some of the people sort of identified that they'd like some more of, or that they'll do some more of after the session. Yeah, so the next cybersecurity, Cyber Smart Dealers webinar now won't be until early 2024. So stay tuned for our next announcement about when that will be. And I'll let you all go with one final. Thanks very much, Kelly. If you want some more information, get in touch with Kelly or the rest of her team at Macpherson Kelley. We really appreciate your time today, everyone, and thanks very much.
Yeah.